Ooh. Hello, folks.
Hello.
Hi, Nick. Hello. कैसा था?
ठीक बा.
एक बार. Very nice. Enjoying the sessions.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes. Very nice. I'm also happy. Today we have an AI with us. I've invited one. It's like for just for taking notes and
Hmm.
just try and see if that certain part can be outsourced. Then people don't have to worry about scribbling. Catch, 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 catch. I remember there were some very nerd kids, no, in our college also. Those who are like always taking notes.
I know I've been doing that all
Yeah.
for all my meetings, taking notes.
Well, if that works out, that you can, people can be more present, but we'll test it out today how that works. But हाँ, फिर भी
Nice.
ले सकते हो notes, हाँ, कोई load नहीं है life में. नमस्ते.
नमस्ते कर दो. नमस्ते.
आप जंगल लगाओगे?
हाँ.
हाँ, मेरे को भी लगाना बहुत अच्छा लगता है.
मैं भी रानी. हाँ.
ऐसे ही नाइस.
सबको हाय कर दो, सबको सबको. बाय भी कर दो. बाय बाय. ओके बाय. बाय.
I good. It's time to start. Let's go. Are you guys ready? Mm, Okay, are you guys ready? Almost ready? Yes. Yes, 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 yes. Ready to go. Tidding, 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 tidding. So it's the wrong PPT I picked up. This first PPT would be this one. And then we can start. Okay, yes. Good. So we'll go back into our few things that we left behind. But before everything else that happens, I would like to ask, a little bit of revision question. Um, yeah, I'll I'll say I'll say a tree, and you have to tell me whether you think it's a pioneer or it's climax. Right? You can just put a yes or you can put a no. Sounds good? Yes, definitely sounds good. Okay, so my first tree would be Mahua, if some of you are aware of it. If you're not, then it's okay. But if you know of it, tell me it's Climax or Pioneer. Okay, there's a Pioneer. Okay, now we are having a bit of fight. There's some people saying it's Climax, some saying it's Pioneer. Hmm. Yeah. Yes. Why do you think it's Pioneer or why do you think it's Climax? Yeah. Ding, 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 ding. Put your head through it. So Mahua is a tree which is very popular in central India. And it has these beautiful flowers that everybody likes to get drunk on, but that's what people do. Yeah, I think it's a climax species. It's actually grows in the mahua's flowers and seeds fall very close to the tree, right? So a lot of times, mostly yes, birds do feed on it, but the seeds are usually a little bigger and they fall much closer and yeah, and they like to raise their own children. So they grow like a family. They grow lot of mahua trees go in bunches together. So there are always a couple of things that work out in the favor of them being both. And then let's see. What do you think about neem? Pioneer? Yeah, pioneer, yes. Very nice. It's very simple over there, no? Because there, the definitely birds eat it because the seeds are very small. So it actually passes through the gut system and drops shit at other places and grows. And it can actually, grow pretty much on its own in middle of nowhere. It doesn't need a community, doesn't need a lot of ecosystem around it, doesn't need much water. It's very resilient. What else? Gulmohar. Yeah. Gulmohar. I know it's not native, so you don't have to be in a conundrum. That's a tree which is very common and we see all around it. Climax? Why do you think it's climax? Mm, yeah, I think it's pioneer. It it grows very easily, doesn't need much of a community, does not require much resources to survive, and can be planted in a lot of difficult kind of situations. Anna? Good. Thank you so much for participating in this. It just gives me confidence that you've all been aware, mostly. And yeah, it's always a proud moment when these things happen. Um, it's the it's up. Chat. Yeah. So we'll quickly run through our things that we understood yesterday. Okay. We talked about what is Earth. We talked about how there are like different ideas of it being our home. This is where we live. It's the ecosystem. Some of the people also talked about Gaia, being the mother Earth over there. What is forest? And we talked about something which has a lot of plants, a lot of life. It supports life, lungs of humans. But as we understood, that is still considered something apart from what the human things are. And with the journey of this workshop, we will be seeing how we can actually bring forest much closer to our spaces in and around us. And there's a very interesting um, line somebody said, and it said that, to create a forest, to make a forest, you have to become a forest. And that's something I try to understand and imbibe. It's like, it's also the way the shamans, and the Native American tribes, they talk about when you want to hunt an animal, you have to become that animal. You have to start seeing into its psyche, how it behaves, where it drinks, what are the patterns. And the same thing we have to do with the forest. So every time you're going out there to see what kind of forest are we trying to make, if you're going out and studying the forest of that region, existing forest, if you can find, if you're lucky enough to find existing forest, stock it, try to understand why it's growing, how it's growing, what are the relationships between the species in that particular area. Try to start thinking like a forest and you'll start becoming like a forest and then you'll be making amazing forests. Yes. We talked about emergence, how actually certain species, they behave much more differently when they're planted alone, and they actually behave very differently when they're planted as a community. And yeah, because when they're on their own, they have to do everything on their own. And that's also very much a big difference between tree plantation and forest creation. Because tree plantation looks into a philosophy where tree is the basic unit, they don't consider the relationship that tree will have with the next tree being planted next to it. So in the name of greenwash, there are a lot of big plantations that are happening, and I feel that they're wrecking the environment because they're planting just like one single species in large areas of land, which really alters a lot of things and does not allow more native species to come up. So if you are still planting monoculture, I would request you to avoid it, have more and more species, because that's now how forests come back. Okay, I did some doodling over here of trees and things growing. I'll pass on to it. My doodles are still here. I'll have to erase it. We talked about species, the succession. We talked about how um, after, and which is secondary succession, is what we actually come and see. How after every time a forest is gone from some place, slowly the weeds are the first one to rise, the grasses start coming, then the shrubs start coming, then fast growing species start dominating the area, and hundreds and hundreds years later we find the climax community. And very interesting, it usually comes because every kind of species, there's a very high competition out there. While there is collaboration, there's also very high competition. Every species can only specialize in one aspect. Just imagine if you are a civil engineer and you had to be the plumber also. Okay. Okay, even forget that. Just imagine a civil engineer, designing houses for children. How horrible they would do. They'll make like straight lines and blocks, and children would be like, what? These are not organic. Yes. And then there would be architect. Imagine an architect, building up a 10-story building, and, with all its, structural engineering, designing it and calculating it. And God forbid if I ever be part of it. But, we all have a specialized role, and we can't do everything. And so happens the forest. Every species, it adapts to one role that it can do well, and really, really, really well. And thus it forms its niche in the community. So when they have to grow, they can either, be very adapted to growing very fast. If you'll see like poplar and people, the leaves are very, especially like poplar, the leaves are very, very light. And when wind blows through it, they turn both the sides because they got chlorophyll layer on both the sides of the leaves. So they're like, now we take some sunlight, now we take some sunlight, and we're taking it double the sunlight, and we go double the speed. And they can do it because, even maintaining chlorophyll in the leaves itself, chlorophylls are living cells. It requires energy. So, they're almost like solar plants that, when the sun comes out, and in the early in the morning, if some of you have solar plants, the solar plants don't kick in even with the first sunlight. And they require a certain threshold of light to be there before the energy starts being generated. And that's also happens with, and there are certain things which, there are certain, just a second. There's certain um, energy which is required to maintain the apparatus that comes with the solar panels, the inverter that comes along with it, or the controller that comes along with it. And if, it's not able to generate enough energy, so there's actually more energy being consumed than being generated. So similarly, the plants are also the same. The chlorophyll level, it's really efficient if the leaves, they're generating the enough energy, because they itself consume a lot of energy. So yeah, so the pioneers do that, they go like very intense on capturing energy because they have specialized in growing in the open where there's abundance of sunlight, and they can take those steps, they can take those risks. But a climax species, their trees, their leaves specialize in growing where hardly any sunlight is comes. So you'll find a lot of times that the leaves are probably rougher and thicker, and they don't really move that much. And you'll see that certain one side of the leaves is green and the other is like whitish. There's like they're like completely preserve themselves on the part of chlorophyll because they know that it's only going to come from this part. Their efficiency is much higher. Their sleeves are a little more complex, and they're actually investing resources into making those bit complex leaves because they want very high susceptibility to sunlight. Yeah. So everything grows very differently. So while a pioneer species, if it grows, among climax trees, it will always struggle because there's just so much shade and it won't be able to last. And that's how the succession comes through over the time, slowly. No matter what happens, if there are climax species, because they're a shade specialist, because for generation and thousand years, they've like used to growing in the shade of their own parents and stuff. Because they're shade specialists, they would come in. The problem comes when there are just no more climax community left around. And, their succession is always stuck at the pioneer stages. So that's why it's very important to start working with the climax forest. We'll talk more about the examples of these species on day 3 when we start talking about species in very particular way. Yeah, so I think that will give you much more clarity. Good. Did you enjoy the story of the forest? This I like this one where India hits China, and sudden workshop people go very political. It's like, China, Hogdo. Yeah, but thanks for all of you behaving, keeping politics outside this one. Yeah, we talked about how the forests have changed over the time, how initially they were very different. They were tropical forests. And then they whammed into China, and then things went up. The mountains came and became cold. And then the forests from the Europe, they marched all the way. If you guys want to see how that marching happens, let me just show you on this little thing that, if there were, this is Europe and this is Asia and this is India somewhere. It's okay. So these were the temperate forests, at one point where things were very cold in the north and they were like very cold loving species over there. But when the ice age happened, everything became cold. So they started expanding down, down, down. Looks like Africa, yes. Okay, fine. Actually, in Africa also the same thing happened. In Ethiopia, it's a country which is very much raised up compared to so it's like Shimla of Africa, where everybody goes. The capital city is at the height of 2,200 meters. Um, so even in that country, while everything else around is so barren and dry and hot, you come to Ethiopia, you come to Addis Ababa, the capital city, and bam, they're like temperate forests, like cold forest over there. So they all moved into the cold time and they started coming in. And when the ice age withdrew, these things started going back, because, the tropical forests, they started again dominating the cycle, and they moved, the tropical forests, they like started reclaiming back the land because hot things are come. And in little pockets where the elevation were very high, these temperate forests stayed behind. So the forests march and they change and they move around a lot. So, yes, now I'll clear it. That. And then there was a big war, which happened where the broadleaf attacked the the cheer and the conifer forest and took over the land. That's another story in detail if you ever get into. And then we talked about Dr. Kira Miyawaki, about how awesome he was, and he still is, and he has worked everywhere else. And today, we'll now start delving into the definition of Miyawaki method. It's as simple as this: dense and random plantation of native species. That's it. Now you can close this workshop. You got the lesson. I'm going. Ta-da! Yeah. If only life could be that simple, but it's not. We'll break it up, the entire definition, into smaller pieces, dense. And Dr. Miyawaki is very clear when he says that, with his method, he's replicating the densest part of a forest. Now forests, they are different. Forest has parts where it's very dense, it has parts where it's very sparse. There are parts where there's grassland, there's part where there's open land. But with Miyawaki method, what he's trying to do is replicate the densest part. And and that is important here because he's trying to bring back the climax species. I mean, that's the motivation over here. The idea, because nobody else is working on the climax species, and climax species are very hard to survive when you plant them in the open. For example, sal forest, sal is another climax species, and everybody just says sal cannot be planted. But because they've been planting these sal species like far, far apart, from each other, and they are properly community species, they just don't grow if you plant them on their own. They don't survive. Yeah. So, um, yeah. And that's why with his method, the key idea was always the climax species. One of the biggest issues that we have with Miyawaki plantation that are happening in India today is that nobody really understand, uh, climax species. I'm pretty sure some of you over here have already been part of certain Miyawaki plantation, but the species list that you would have planted with would have had like majorly pioneer species, because that's what is very easily available, that's cheaply available, and that's most commonly people understand. But if you just plant pioneer species, the forest usually falls apart after 5 years. The kind of the seed recovery is not able to happen in those forests, and you can see the difference. But if you have enough climax species as part of it, so when Dr. Miyawaki actually suggests that at least 60% of the forest you're planting should be of climax species, right? And personally, when I do a forest, I do a 50, 25, 25 sort of a split, where 50% is a climax species, 25 is the um, successional species, and then 25% the pioneer. Intersectionals are usually like pivoting species, but that's just a little more technical. And when you come into um, the succession, but we'll put it outside the scope. But you can just keep it as a general, like 60-40 is a good rule, 50-50 can also be done. 50 climax, 50 pioneer, 60 climax, and 40 pioneer. That's great to go. Yeah. Then he says that, random plantation, so he says that please don't make a grid. Don't ever make a grid. And, people, we are obsessed with shapes and patterns and blocks and squares and lines and things, where we want to cut out space and have very specific thing. Okay, I know that these species will grow with each other, so I'm going to put it like this. I've had participants who have created like AI systems to like really plot the most ideal and optimum plantation for Miyawaki species. Don't do that. I mean, if you really want to do that, do it because that's gives you joy, but it's not essential. It's really, really not essential. But do it if it's that fun for you. Please do. Yeah. And yeah, the randomness, let there be randomness, because that's something which is very inherent in nature. You really, 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 nothing is like highly optimum. Plants, they grow sometimes, and in random places, they don't get to choose, and here also, and it would give very different characteristics. you know that competition, that collaboration, it's like no matter how much hard we try to understand it and zoom in, we'll always fall short of it, right? Plantation, because it's an artificial plantation. So a lot of people, they tell me that, hey, these are not natural forests. And like, hell no, they're bloody not natural forests. They were natural forests which are gone now. Deforestation itself is not a natural process, the amount of deforestation we have done. Um, and no matter whatever we do, it would, because we have damaged the ecosystem so beyond the thing that even if we let the natural regeneration happen on its own, it would still be an artificial process, because the species like climax species and a lot of other species which would have participated in the entire journey of succession, because this this journey which happens where one generation of species take over, and at different phases the forest is being dominated by different species, and there's a pivoting that is happening into the climax phase, slowly. So a lot of those, if those key species are gone, then bam, so nothing anymore is natural. And that's something for us to understand. Yeah. So yeah, it's also a plantation, but we call it quasi natural forest, like natural, like similar to natural forest. That's like the technical word for uh, this kind of forest that we use. And native species, the most critical part. And when he talks about native, it's not just okay, what is native to India? He goes more specific. You have to find what is native to exactly your ecoregion. Something that's native to Mumbai may not be native to Kolkata, may not be native to Jaipur, may not be native to Delhi. There's certain species which are found pretty much like across India. You know, could you guys name some of the species you feel is easily found across India? And could be native to larger Indian, mass. Okay, good. Man, get wrong answers. I don't care. People, neem, yeah. So they're more native to Eastern India, and not to Mumbai, for example, not to Chennai. Um, and it's very interesting because if you go in even into the deepest forest in somewhere in Rajasthan, and in the middle of it there is a village, um, you'll find that in that middle of the village there is a neem tree, and that neem tree is growing. But if you um, if you go anywhere in the forest, you won't find the neem tree. So people went and took it along with them wherever they went. It's very humanly useful species. Same goes with people. Very human-friendly species. So people take it along. Burgers has a very interesting history, because I think, and that's my assumption over here, based upon what limited readings I've had. So Bargat is native to the Himalayan foothills. So that's where Kailash is. And, if you go into the stories, they say that, there is a big banyan tree over there and it's so huge, it covers a big portion of land. And maybe it's true. Um, but uh, it's when the Shaivite movement was picking up in south of India, and especially with Kartikeya as a deity, was moved probably to the south. A lot of followers of Shiva, they brought Bargat along, and you'll find it in a lot of those temples. And you won't find Bargat in a lot of the forests in the south. So so yeah, it's people who have moved a lot of things. Then there is Tendu. Yeah, Tendu is very, very common across the central, and it has a strong boundary towards south also, and it has a strong boundary towards north. So yeah, it's very common across India. Imli, there is a debate about Imli. I mean, this is a scientific community, right? Like everybody's always fighting. And there is a debate that maybe Imli is not truly even native to India, that it's been brought from the Southeast India, just because of the human need, and the anthropogenic uses of Imli tree, and it's not native to India. Sad, sorry, Anuja. But this split, huh? Yes, the split. You can join on the side and put in your arguments. Yeah. Yes. Lychee, I'm not really sure, but I'll pass on it. Good, good, good. You're getting the hang of it. Yeah, yeah, yes. Karanj. Karanj is also quite across India, you'll find it. Akhroat is something you'll find mostly in in the Himalayan region. That's where it is native to. Um, I think so, yeah. I can be wrong, so feel free every time you think, hey, man, you're wrong. You go back, do your research, and you put it on the WhatsApp group. Hey, you said this thing in the meeting today, but you were wrong. And then this is the correction. I'll be very happy because I'll get to learn few things. And there are a lot of things that I don't know. Yes. Good. So do we have a sense of um what it means? Miyawaki method? Yes. Can I do one thing? Can we just all um unmute yourself for a moment and just read that little definition. Let there be chaos, let there be random things, but read it. Go ahead, all of you. Dense and random plantation of native.
Of native species.
Good. So that's the secret, which is, this very short summary, which was brought forward by Miyawaki after hundreds, and not hundreds, after decades of his research. For four decades, he worked on developing this thing. And yeah, that's it. So when the core thing when he talks about native is that, it has to be potential natural vegetation, PNV. So potential natural vegetation means that the vegetation that would be expected given environmental constraints, climate, without human intervention or a hazard event. That means that for a particular space, when you're planning what kind of forest it should be there, that, okay, this is the largest set of species which should be native to this region. But from that, we'll have to start, okay, given this climate, if it's very hot over there, okay, certain species will not be able to grow because these are moved from the cold thing. If it's very dry over there, certain species would not be able to grow, so you remove them. If it's very wet over there, certain species will find it hard to struggle, you remove them. Geomorphology, it's I forgot what it means, but it must be something amazing. Go back and check it. Geology is again the earth, even the soil. If it's a clay soil, certain species will start dominating much more. If there's lime in the soil, teak gets an advantage over the species and will start dominating. So every little thing, changes the composition of the forest. And so potential natural vegetation talk about the vegetation that would be expected given these environment constraints that we talked about without human intervention or hazard event, right? So if no humans would have really interfered over there, and if everything were like very natural, if a plot of land would have been left to its own device over hundreds of years, what kind of forest would emerge over there? That's the potential natural vegetation of that area. Nice. It's not that hard. Good. Yeah. Do you feel smarter learning a proper definition? I feel smarter like talking about it. Okay, sorry. No jokes, no making fun of students. That's my partner keeps saying me. She'll pull me for it later. Yes. So one of the very important aspect that Dr. Miyawaki talks about is actually there is a mixie going on in the background. Can you hear it? No, right? Good, thank God. Yeah. So let me know if it starts bothering you at a certain point. So the forest happens in layers. And that's very interesting because there are no fixed layers. There are, if you go to a rainforest, you'll find probably a 7-layer system where everything is growing on its own. So when we talk about layers, what we mean is that, there would be like shrubs growing around um, very close to the ground level. And there could be some herbs also growing very, very close to the ground level. And then there would be trees, there is one unbroken layer of trees. So because all the trees, most of the trees, like majority, so this usually, I think we change the nomenclature. So this is no longer canopy. So I'll just fix it over here. I haven't done this workshop in 2 years. So yeah, I think some of the materials now updated. So now we call this the emergent layer, even for the Miyawaki thing. And we call this canopy layer because that's how it is, because the majority of your trees would actually exist in this layer. This is the kind of layer where, where a lot of trees, they just come and stabilize. So yeah, it's a very long and broken layer of trees because beyond this, and it comes with a very natural balance. For example, central India is also called the forest of the giants. So there, this canopy layer is very high. It goes like the trees, an average tree in this layer would go up to like 30 meters. But if you come to the mountains, where the average height is much more lower, this canopy layer is achieved at a much shorter height. 15 meters tops, 10 meters sometimes, based upon the altitude level. Yeah, in the rainforest in Western Ghat, these can go very high. But if you look into the TDEF, the tropical dry evergreen forest, they can go a little low. So they all vary from place to place. So this is where majority of your species, will come and stabilize, and they won't try to outcompete each other beyond a point. They'll be like, okay, भाई तू भी इतने में रह, मैं भी इतने में रहता हूँ. अब इसके ऊपर push करेंगे, it's more inefficient for all of us. So there is like unwritten agreement between all the species. So they're like, let's not now try to compete itself. So they'll just try to expand themselves horizontally. So you'll see very interestingly, with this concept, what happens that trees, when they start growing in very dense areas, they'll first grow tall. They won't grow thick. Because if they grow thick, what will happen? If they start putting on weight and expanding their girth much more earlier on, what will happen? Think about it. Okay, fine. This is, they'll have to spend more energy with less sunlight. This is a thin tree and this is a thick tree. So the amount of biomass that will be within this is much lesser and this is much higher. So if they start putting up girth much earlier on, then to put every single inch of layer on top of it for the height, they'll have to invest on that much time, more resources. Yeah. So it actually increases by the square, the amount of energy required in a logarithmic manner. So if they have to be smart, and right now, because they're all small and it's a very dense area, they don't have access to a lot of sunlight and need this sunlight to make carbon and start putting up, the fat over there inside the bulk. So they all try to go very lean and very thin. The leaner and thinner and straighter is the winner. Because if some of them start growing teda, then also they're like wasting a lot of their energy. So they're bound to probably fall down. So like leaner, thinner, straighter, and that's how they grow. And once they've reached the canopy layer and they've occupied that space, that's when they start fattening up. And then they'll start making the girth because now they have, tapped into that unlimited energy wala ecosystem, which is there in the sun. And they'll start fattening up and growing and become thick and have more efficiency. Has anyone seen that in dense forests, thin trees? Yeah, that's okay. We all like thick trees, but so a lot of time people ask me, okay, and this forest is going so fast, but when will they look like trees which are fat and big? It's like, well, they should not. That's obesity. Yeah. Yes. So Devdar, yes, Devdar grows very thin and tall, and then it starts expanding. So a lot of species which actually are climax species like oak, if you just plant it out in the open, like not densely, then what will happen? They'll start growing like a shrub, because, their seeds are tuned in, with one mission. They're like, okay, the moment you get out of your seed, start growing up tall, north, up. And the moment you reach that unlimited sunlight space, then you start expanding. But, the moment they sprout, they just start seeing sunlight everywhere. Like, oh, the heaven has come. And they'll start fattening up and they'll start growing up in this thing and they'll become very inefficient. And thus, they lose out on a lot of energy, which they could have built up. So in the mountains, people say, it's very essential to keep lopping the oak tree to make it go straight up, and that's actually an artificial constraint that people are putting it to match up to the lack of density. which should have been provided in natural forest. So these are the dominant canopy layer which are across the forest, which you find. So a lot of our species. So when we do a species list, at least like 50 to 60% of a species, sometimes 40% of the species actually grow in this layer. And this is like one of the most highly competitive layers in the forest. And between them, there would be certain species, the emergent layer, which will be like, okay, bye, and it will shoot up beyond this layer, and they are called the emergent species. So for example, Semel. So if you see in the Western Ghats, it would be like like big forest, and in the middle of it popping would be a Semel tree. It's like the red cotton, silk cotton tree. You'll see it shooting up, and like everybody else is there, thoda niche, and this bhaiya is like very happily being tall. And you'll see these kind of species actually like popping up, and they can grow very tall. So while the other average species would be like 30 meters, they can go up to 40 meters, 50 meters, way beyond the competition and happily survive over there. And yet there are species which actually, specialize in living in the sub-canopy layer. These which we usually call the subtree. So they are shocked, and they're like, okay, bhai, nahi hoga mere se. I don't want to. It's too much competition out there. I'm going to specialize in this niche space where there's less sunlight, but there's not much competition. So these are the ones which are very good, and like happily they stay in that kind of layer. And there's a very interesting case of the forest along Pondi in Chennai. So it's called the Tropical Dry Evergreen Forest, TDEF, and it's a three-layered system where there is a shrub layer, there's a tree layer, and a subtree layer. So there's no emergent layer separate over there. But what happens in that is, like, while your canopy layer dominates, for most of the year, it's making sunlight. There is a time when, in the winters, once the water starts drying out, post the winter, because water is one of the most crucial part. Post the winters, the water starts drying out, that the canopy, this canopy layer, it sheds, it leaves all of it, entire layer, because it has to preserve its resources. When the time was good, there was enough water, there was good amount of sun, it made the best of it. But now it's done, now it's like goes dormant. But yeah, the days are not good. And that's when your subtree layer, which is the, evergreen layer. So they are the ones that retain the leaves that time. And then, they start growing because all of a sudden so much sun has opened up. So both the layers, they have very different growing season. Like, ab meri bari, the canopy layer starts growing when the conditions are very nice. And when the conditions are not that nice and great, they shed. And then the emergent, the subtree layer starts growing. And such beautiful symphony that they make in growth. And that's why it's like even being, so it's one of the only three tropical dry evergreen forests in the world. And they're all located along the same area, like Chennai, Pondicherry, Sri Lanka, and there's one more otherwise. And it's evergreen and it's dry. So normally dry spaces are not evergreen, but because of this little arrangement, this unique arrangement, they figured out that even in dry area, they're able to stay evergreen. So brilliant. Yeah. So that's how layer system works. And then there will be shrub layers, which are very happy. So a lot of time, these shrub layers also, like, they won't grow too much tall. And in certain cases, these shrub will also, given the right condition, might behave as a subtree also, So if it's very sunny and open, if they're planted out in the open, as I talk about oak, so these layers will also start sprouting out their branches, and there's like a lot of sunlight and they just stick close to the earth. But if they're growing in a very dense forest environment, they'll start shooting up a little. So they are a little lifted and able to tap into some bit of sunlight, because too close to the ground, they won't get sunlight. So they usually form very interesting mix. So when we plant a forest, okay, I'll just show you a few more examples, just because these images don't really help. But if I can see the tick, 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 annotations. For some reason, I'm not able to scroll. Good. So this is how this entire system would look in real life. So these are forest. These are photographs I took in Ethiopia. Because it was, and you can find it in central India, you'll find it in Western Ghats, you'll find something very, very similar. And you can see, up close that there are certain species which are sprouting up way beyond the means of other species. You can probably look at this one is going way beyond. You can look at this one. These are probably the emergent species in this ecosystem, while, a lot of them, most of them are growing on the tree layer, which are here. Da, 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 da. And that's how they work in a very multi-layered system. Yeah. Yes. So you can see now the same photograph from the ground level. So these are the people. So that's from the top of the tower. I took the photograph, and from the base of the tower, this is a photograph where you can see now the shrubs growing over here in this layer, and certain tree. There's probably an emergent tree, which is going up over here. Da, 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 da. This is an emergent tree growing up way beyond. And then there are like tree layers da, 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 growing somewhere. So yeah, so in nature, there are multi-layered forests, and that's how they grow. But you'll never see these multi-layered forests, if you're doing conventional plantation, or you're doing you know, just single layered plantation, and if you're not really looking to a species diversity. So this multi-layer arrangement is very, very important. And now you'll only find the multi-layered system, where the ecosystem is very robust. So even in Rajasthan, you'll see, if you look at the species around, you'll find them all like scattered trees in far, far away land. But if you're able to see certain, untouched parts of Ranthambore forest, you'll be able to see a very intact multi-layered system over there. Yeah. Hmm. So that's why when we plant a Miyawaki forest, we mix these layers together. And very interestingly, what will happen is firstly, the shrubs, which are the pioneer communities, the shrubs and the pioneer trees, they'll start growing, and they'll take over. So you can see a lot of shrubs over here, and certain pioneer species which have taken up. The climax species are still growing. So were there any family trees in Ethiopia? Well, very interestingly, they have Karonda is native to both Africa and India. So that's a species which was familiar, but otherwise there was similar species, like they had certain species, and we had like the family is the same, but the species is different, sort of thing. So yeah, that was there. And yeah, in this you'll see that the the shrubs will start actually growing up very fast. And the best thing that they do is the shrubs, they're very good at loosening up the soil. That's their stellar thing, because if you remember, shrubs come much earlier in the succession, much earlier the shrubs come. So the shrubs are very good at loosening up the soil and breaking it out. So the shrubs will start growing niche and opening up the soil, while your pioneer trees will start growing upper and providing a shade. And from that, once that is done. So usually the Miyawaki trees that you see all the photographs of 1 and 2 years, you're like, oh my God, there's a forest that's been created. Well, to a trained eye, they'll see, yes, there's a very dense and big forest, but they're mostly pioneer species currently. Even in the Miyawaki system, the forest is at a pioneer level. And the climax species, if they have planted any, would slowly be growing inside at a very slow pace, waiting for their time, aram say. And this pioneer species, they'll go up and create kind of umbrella, which provides a lot of shade to the species, the climax species. And in that shadow, slowly, the climax species start inching. So the good thing that happens when these pioneer species, they put up shade is that it blocks sunlight from coming to the forest floor, because when the sunlight should not be on the forest floor, because when that happens, it starts drying up the soil, and the moment it starts drying up the soil, it's very hard for climax species to survive. Yeah. So, so a lot of places where they were climax species, just because people kept lopping the branches, cutting off the branches, they're like, oh, this tree anyway has a lot. We can just take some of the branches. We won't cut the tree. But what they did was, by cutting up the branches, they opened up the soil, the forest floor to sunlight, which started drying it up, and their own seeds could not germinate in that soil because it would always be dry. So those are the things. So that's what the things do. The shrubs will go down. They'll start opening up the things. And a lot of shrubs and pioneer species are nitrogen fixing. They create all their own nitrogen. While your climax species, because it takes a lot of energy to create their own nitrogen also, because you have to parlow another set of bacteria, the rhizomes, you know, who will, make food for you, and you have to feed them. They won't make it for free. You have to get their energy from the sun, and a part of food that you're going to eat, you have to part with them. And in return, they'll make nitrogen for you, which is available to you. So it is not very energy efficient, but it's very essential in places where the nitrogen is not much in the soil, right? So in places where the quality of the soil is not that great, because you need nitrogen to survive. So these pioneer species and the shrubs, they all specialize in it, and they start pumping in nitrogen, which then helps the climax species to grow up slowly, and take over. And that's how slowly over the time, you get something like this when you start planting at this. This is another forest project that we've done. So now do you see what sense the multi-layered thing makes? What kind of thing, what kind of understanding of the forest Dr. Miyawaki has worked on to be able to create this kind of system, which enables climax species to be planted. Yeah. How's it? Yeah, like if you think that now day one has finally ended, no, I usually know that it always overlaps into the next day, but these are the modules. That's how I've broken. So don't worry, you won't miss out on anything in the time to come here. Yeah. Should we start the next module? You want to stretch yourself a little? Get up, move. Lokesh has a question, please ask.
So I may not frame it properly, but I'm just thinking loud in my mind.
Mhm.
So we are creating a forest, and we might not reach at a point where where like the climate, climax forest will come and all, but there will be a time where at least the temperature or the water balance is created in the system. Um, do you think that actually really happens when we do the Miyawaki forest? And also, uh, there's a thing that is going in our mind that we keep planting, but the intensity with which we are chopping the tree will it actually be able? Will they be balanced then? Hmm, I don't understand.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why it's hard. I did not clearly understand the first question. Um, but just give me a moment. Hello, Rahil. Can मैं मीटिंग में हूँ, आप मेरे को 9 o'clock कॉल कर सकते हो? 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock को ना, 9 p.m. I'll call you. है ना? I'm in a meeting, है ना? Thank you, Rahil.
Bye.
That was a friend of mine. Um, So I did not get the first question, but somewhere I'm understanding. I think also because I have lot of construction work going on in the background over here. I'm just fortunate you guys are not being subjected to it. But if you could just write down your question, and I'll probably get back to you in detail, and I'll put it across. But when it comes to the chopping and planting, yeah, we're chopping too fast. I mean, as people and as a race, we have to um, really do a lot more reforestation that's required where it's relevant and based upon the kind of ecoregion where this is. But a lot of times when we see that, oh, but forest of Rajasthan, तो इतना density नहीं होता है, but that's a bluff because if you read stories of the battle of Maharana Pratap versus the Mughals when they come, those stories, those legends, they'll have mention of how Maharana Pratap went and hid in the forest of certain species, and where the Mughals could never reach, the elephants could not cross those forest tract, and they had to be left behind um, because the forest was so thick. So it's like what we see right now may not how it would have always been. So we're trying to like rework that balance of succession, which has been broken up by like generations and generations of exploitation. So that's it. The other thing that people often ask is that if there's so many species, which probably you asked, I'm not too sure. If there's so many plants per square meter, they'll be transpiring a lot of water in the air. So isn't it going to dry out the soil? But that's not the case because, there is always that water balance where, having this kind of density actually blocks water from being evaporated from the soil itself because they're completely covered. So the only kind of evaporation that's happening is through the leaves, which is still much more controlled and, is based upon it. And they're also able to absorb a lot of water and sequester it into the earth. So in the net balance, actually don't really put out that much. Do we plant grasses and creepers in climax region? So grasses and creepers are much early in the succession. And interestingly, when we work with succession, we focus on, I'll share with you. So when we work on the succession, we focus on planting something which is annotation. We try to focus on this particular region from here, from intermediate stage onwards. These are the species we plant. We don't plant perennial herbs, grasses, and creepers because, they would not be able to survive in a dense forest. And if you remember, we said that we mimic the densest part of the forest, right? And that's the objective with Miyawaki method. So that's why we don't plant perennial herbs and grasses. So a lot of people also plant bamboo for some reason in their Miyawaki forest. Akira Miyawaki hates it. It's like, please, bamboo is a grass. Don't plant it. It's not supposed to be there. Um, but कौन समझाए? So that's the objective. But what he does suggest is that when you're planning a large scale project, if you're mimicking the densest part of the forest, you plant your Miyawaki forest here. And along the periphery, the fringe, he calls it, you plant grasses, you plant herbs. And I'll show you a very interesting example of it where he has done that. And so then it becomes a much more holistic kind of ecosystem because every species has their own place in the larger role of things. Yeah. Every area. How many plants growing in Miyawaki plantation of every area? So usually when we're mimicking it, it varies from 3 to 5 per square meter. So in regions of in rainforest, especially in Amazon rainforest, you'll have it where it's 7 layered systems. So even the number of layers are much more higher. So they're not all growing in the same layer. So if you can imagine, everybody going the same layer, then they'll be like very crowded. But when you start working with 7 layered systems, there'll be something which is growing just niche, something a little upper. So they're all fit in very easily. So in those kind of places, your density goes up to 5 per square meter. And it's 5 plants, not just 5 trees. So you have plants of every sort. You have shrubs, you have ground covers, which are very happily, so some of them are the very climax ground covers which stick to the ground and still are able to survive in the densest part of the forest. And those places will be 5 per square meter. But in places where, like mostly across India, 3 is a very reasonable when you're working with a 4 layer system or a 3 layer system, 3, and I would even say you can come down to 2.5 is what we plant per square meter. Yeah. Very good. So now, new module, the soil. Are you guys ready? Yes. Yes, 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 yes. We all love soil. And it's the thing that some of you must have eaten it as children, and some of you still eat it because it's so full of life. And there's this one very interesting. I remember watching Mahabharata as a kid, and this Krishna, that Sri Krishna as a kid, and then at one point he's eating butter, and somebody comes and said that, hey, you're eating butter. You stole the butter. Like, I didn't steal the butter. You stole it. It's all over your face. And like, no, you're imagining it. Like, open your mouth. I can see the butter. And he opens his mouth, and there's a full world inside. The cosmos is inside. And that's what I feel with the soil. It's the world of cosmos. Sorry, it's it's just a personal take on it. I love it. Oh, you would also see Hajalo being introduced over here. Hajalo is the organization me and my partner Bombel we run, and we're working with the youth in the mountains. Um, yeah, it's we are focusing on creating forest over there, but more about it later. Let's start. Okay. Now, question of the day, and be ready to type out your answers and let the chat window roll. There you go. What is soil? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can never really go wrong. I mean, there's no right answer. It's your answer. And that's what you believe in. Okay, fine. Soil is soil. I agree with it. Okay. Level up a little. It's a mixture of minerals, water, air, and organisms. It's land. It's broken down rocks, biomass. Soil is life. It has nutrients for plants, microbes. Yeah, it's all of that. Organic and inorganic matter. Yes. Nutrition, right? So it's the land, also many bacteria and minerals, right? So there is one way of looking at it as something very physical. It has a lot of physical properties, there's a lot of minerals, and those elements, Then there's a biological way of looking at it, a lot of bacteria there. Then there's energetic way of looking at it, something which is very grounding. And that's what probably assumed when you said grounding. Yeah, it's a mix of all of it. And if you look at it all together, it's where the all life grows, and it's actually the base of all the life. Like all of us the minerals and everything, it all comes from the soil. Our elements are made from the soil. So, when the soil is the feminine and the solar is the masculine, and both when the feminine and masculine combine, it's the life that forms, and which is us. Yeah, passage for water to seep in, yeah, and place for it to store the water. So thank you for the wonderful definitions. But I'll again bring it back to see that, somehow whenever we talk about soil, we still talk it as it's something different, something out there, which has microbes and bacteria and has all the minerals, but something which is not us. And, that's notion we can just challenge that, soil is us, it's building block of human body. And similarly, it's building block of the trees and the plants and everything out there and all the animals out there. Yeah. And one of the most important, one of the most familiar and one of the most famous conversation when people start talking about is carbon versus nitrogen. What's your carbon versus nitrogen ratio in the soil? Let's fix your carbon versus nitrogen ratio in the soil. And so I'll just give you a little bit brief about what they do. Carbon is the flow of energy through the entire system. So it's like how you have your power bank, which holds all the energy inside it, and you connect it to your phone, and that energy flows into your phone. And then that energy, once it gets into your phone, it's used to run all those processes and the little screen, and that energy is translated into a screen where you can see things happening. You see a phone come to life. It could be your laptop, it could be your TV. In some forms, energy is converted into heat in the form of like water heater and geyser. And that's the role carbon play in the organic world. It's the flow of energy. It moves from the sun to, carbon is the base in which it's stored, and it makes into glucose, the energy thing. And yeah, and then this glucose flows and is part of every little task a plant does. Energy comes from this glucose, with which carbon is the base. And when we eat these plants, that energy is being transferred to us and forms the base inside it. And then we use that energy. So it is it's the way the energy flows in the in the plant system. And that's while carbon does a lot of other things, it's one of the major role that the carbon plays. And always feel free to correct me later or never. But that's what I believe in. That's how I see it. And nitrogen is like the building block. It forms like from amino acid to a lot of your own cell structures. Nitrogen plays a very key role over there. So I see it as structural component of life, while carbon is the full component. So like one is dynamic and one is static. And that's why a lot of people prefer to have them in certain ratio. And even plants, they usually, if there is carbon and nitrogen available, they eat it in particular ratio, which is like 30:1. They're taking 30 parts of carbon, they need 1 part of nitrogen to go along with it. And it changes, it varies between 1 is to 26:1, 30:1. But they always consume it in fixed ratio. And mostly in nature, your nitrogen is the one which is always falling short on supply. Everywhere. It's a natural limiter in the forest world and in the world out there. There's always abundance of carbon, which is again eaten much larger in plants. But nitrogen is very volatile. It's very easy for it to evaporate and vanish into the air. So the nitrogen flow also dictates how fast, a forest is growing. And it's a very natural control. But, if you would have heard about the Green Revolution, that's what it did. It just introduced a lot of nitrogen all of a sudden into the system. The urea is basically nitrogen. And, for a few decades, we had like amazing yield because the plants were eating carbon, nitrogen in much higher ratio and much higher level. And yeah, and it reached a point where carbon got depleted in the soil, and now that's the next big crisis we are seeing is actually lack of soil carbon. So if there's not enough carbon, it doesn't matter how much nitrogen you put, The plant will always take it in the ratio 90:1. But it can't really consume it because there's no more carbon left. We exploited it and that balance is off. So we need to restore a lot of carbon in our systems now. But I don't worry about these things because like in the beginning when I started my work with the forest, I would go ahead, do soil tests, look at the carbon nitrogen ratio and all those kind of things. But much later I figured out that these are things that the forest take care of itself. वो कर लेगा खुद. नहीं है soil. And wherever if the soil is exposed and there's no existing forest over it, the carbon nitrogen level will be pathetic, like flat pathetic. Like no way they can be high. तो भी करने का भी सवाल नहीं है. So I don't do soil tests in most of my places because ठीक है, then people talk about micronutrients, वो भी हो जाता है ना? And there is a mystery to how micronutrients get manifested in the forest system, which we'll talk about over the time. One of the few cases where I definitely do a soil test in cases like this, especially the industrial areas, because if you do those things and you realize there's certain toxins or certain chemicals which are very, very high in level, because these are also the places where a lot of industrial dumping has been happening. Then what you do is you bring in a layer of fresh soil and you put it over there, and then you plant forest on top of it. So it just gives them much better chances for the forest to survive, right? And if you don't do that, it is very likely that your plants might suffer damage. So these are the cases when you're working in industrial areas. I prefer soil tests. Otherwise, please, it's not needed. And if you want to do it for fun, if you want to put it with your forest report, if the client wants it, the NGO you're working for wants it, it's good to show. But it's also interesting if you start doing carbon assessment of the land. So, you take the first report, you see certain level of carbon in it. And after 3 years, you take soil samples from that area and do a carbon assessment of a carbon nitrogen assessment. You'll see the growth in it and the healing of the soil that happens. So that's a case where you would be doing those tests. Yeah. So, yeah, the title is quite obvious. Change of color in leaves. Yeah. Yeah, it's autumn. What do you think is happening out there? Yeah, besides change of color in leaves, what else could be happening out there? Resting is happening. Trees shutting down for the winters. Shading. Shades are changing, probably. It's putting up a shade. But why are there just so many different colors out there? Saving energy. Shedding leaves to compensate for water. But I see green here, and I see yellow, and I see red, and I see brown and black. Yeah. So what happens is about absorbing less light, yes. So once drying up, yes. So once the leaves, they decide, like, the tree decides, okay, now it's not an optimum time to make food, because either there's not much water available because it has to use water. जितना खाना बनाएगा उसको उतना पानी चाहिए. But like, in 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 um in the temperate areas where it snows, yes, because it gets too cold, it's going to be like completely snowed. So there's no point of keeping leaves because they won't be able to make food. And that's why they shed their leaves. But in India and tropical areas, the reason why trees shed their leaves is because of water, the water shortage. Because the water is going to dry up. There's not enough water. So if there's not enough water, there's no point making food. And if you're not making food, there's no point wasting energy by keeping your leaves alive. So the first thing is it just blocks, it stops the flow of energy into the leaves. And chlorophyll is a living, it's a living organism, chloroplast inside it. and they are the first ones to die. You know, they just die. They're living things, and once they die, chlorophyll is the green element. You know, that's what makes the color of leaves green. And you can see as it's dying, that green color is being lost, and probably a bit of yellowish is left behind over there. And once that is completely gone or in process of going, what the tree does, it starts pulling up micronutrients, you know, because all the different micronutrients play different role in the leaves. You know, there will be some bit of iron, you know, some bit of copper, some bit of cobalt, some bit of all the calcium and other elements, which are, you know, little more in in shortage out there in the wild. Bit of phosphorus, phosphate. So as it starts pulling out those elements one by one, you know, the chemical, the color they would have had changes. So it's like, okay, now the iron is moving out and it's responsible for certain color in the leaves. And that's why you'll see different spots. And then phosphorus is moving out and you'll see certain things. And then once all the important chemicals have been pulled back and stored inside the tree itself, you know, the leaves get brown, which is mostly carbon, which is anywhere there in abundance. And then they fall down. And that's how the trees are very, very, very smart with managing their micro resources, the micronutrients out there, the metals and other things that they need. So really, 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 there's nothing much to worry about because they have their own strategies to manage these kind of things. They're very smart. So while in agriculture system, you'll put those things here, you really, really don't have to worry about it. Yeah. So this is a strategy of conservation that they do. Yeah. Does it kill your romantic idea of autumn? Just knowing the technicality behind it. Okay, fine. Sorry, Nick. Yeah, that's what happens. Good. So the three components of also creating mulch for themselves, yes. And create mulch, you know, which creates humus. And there are a lot of elements. Some of the species actually even leave bit of nitrogen behind in the leaves. So they decompose and all of a sudden they quickly become part of the humus and are absorbed. That nitrogen is absorbed. So even the nitrogen gets recycled. Doesn't happen in all the cases, but you know, nitrogen recycling also happens in a lot of climax forests, especially when there's not much exposed sun over there. Yeah. तो जब उनको चाहिए होता है तो फिर वापस उठा लेते हैं वहीं से वो लोग. So yes, so there are three very important elements to it. So we talked about the chemical element of the soil. You know, we talked about carbon and nitrogen. We talked about some of the micronutrients out there in brief, because for me, I feel that chemical is, yeah, because I feel that the chemical really is not in short supply out there. It's not very essential. What for me are the most important factors are the physical characteristic and the biological characteristic, right? So we start with physical over here, you know. So you understand, right? Sand, silt, and clay. Mota mota, you know, clay soil, sandy soil. Yes. But I'll still sit with it and I'll try to be little more descriptive today, you know. So essentially all soil is built of, you know, these three elements, the sand, the silt, and the clay. So they're basically particles, you know, which of the soil, and they all come in different range. And how they become what they become is actually based upon you know, kind of environment that they have seen, right? So sandy soil usually comes when, you know, when like the rocks, like in the end, they're all rocks which have broken down over the time with erosion and weathering. But when a rock undergoes a lot of wind erosion, for example, you know, or you know, erosion of certain level of heat and, you know, of water flowing, that's when it form like the flow of water is there. That's where it starts forming sand because the breaking down is happening in a very rough format, like talk, 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 talk. It's not very fine, and they actually make big particles, very, very, very big particles. Tick, tick, tick. The size of each little particle that has been broken up is very big. And what happens is that, these are like, if you've been in, gone to college or school, there are always these bunch of brats, these gundas, everywhere you'll find them, who they all walk in group with guns sticking out. And when they go through, people make way for them. Nobody wants to mess with them, right? These are the thugs, the big bosses. And there's always enough room. They can go into a crowded market, and when they start walking through, no matter how things are, everybody will like leave space for them. So these, they love, these are the thugs, they need their space. They want their big ego surrounding them. So what happens is that there's a lot of spaces between them because they're so big and huge, right? And this allows for a lot of water to seep in and the air to flow. Thus, they have very, very, very good, you know, circulation happening over there, the air circulation, the water flowing. But these are thugs, they really, really can't hold on to anything. The money comes and they spend it all. And that's what happens with water. They don't retain water that much because the particle size is so big, they can't chemically hold on to the water molecules that are flowing by, and everything gets washed away. And what comes goes. So not all is bright and shining in the thug land, but it at least there is space to breathe. They don't live like the common people. And then you have the fine clay, fine clay. And like these are the ones which have had a very harsh life. They were either eroded by chemical processes, if there's like sulfur there and then water comes and then, it becomes sulfuric acid and starts passing through land, or there can be some lime over there, which is converting into acidic things. And it's actually breaking down the rock into much, much, much finer particles. So that's where or even glacial movement, when the ice in a glacier starts moving on the rock, it's very, very abrasive. So in those kind of environments, you actually get very fine, like these are like nicely beaten up people जिनको मतलब बजा दिया है दुनिया ने, मतलब हो गया इनका. And that's why they love to stick together because they're always afraid. They're small, their egos are small, their presence in the world is small. They stick to each other. They're very miser. It's very natural for these kind of things to make people miser, right? So they are like those miser communities, like pani hai bhai, jitna hai pakad le. The particle size is so small that it holds on to water molecule too tightly. But that's the problem. It's so small that it holds on to water molecules very, very tightly. So tightly that even when the plants, they need water in their time, they're like, nahi hai. Jabki hai, but nahi denge. So interestingly, while clay soil has a very high, like, chalo, it doesn't let the water, flow away, but it actually so restrictive that it's no water is able to seep in through. And even if the water that comes in, so it doesn't easily give it to the plants. So yeah, but it's not its fault. Just had tough life and so small. In the end, you have the silt, the silt are the nobles, they're like the royalty of this world. They're usually formed when, like, for example, river flowing. So when river flows along the rocks, it's a good flow. It's not very intense like a glacial flow, right? So, but it's still strong enough. The flow is strong. So it starts breaking the rocks into medium-sized particles. And that's what you get. You get silt. And interestingly, they are the royalties. They're like, उनको बहुत पैसा है, even any water that flows by, there's enough space for it to breathe, not much, not like clay, but just enough for them to breathe. And the water, the particle size resonates so well with water, the particle size of the water, that while they can hold the water, yet when the plants need it, they can actually give it up. Right. So they have enough, they have in abundance, they have what the sand and clay did not have in life. Right. And that's why they're considered like amazing and great. But if it's just silt, even that's not good enough. So most soil that you find, is always a mixture of all these three components. And the presence, the amount of one particular type of soil is like, one component, how much, like if sand is more, it doesn't mean it won't have silt and clay, just that will have them in less numbers and it will have more sandish properties. Somewhere it will be a mix of it. So yeah, did you like the story? Did you guys ever knew these things happen? Very good. I feel smart already. Yeah, and I would have made mistakes, but that's okay. I'm also learning. Yeah, now let's see. You all did your assignments and let's see how that play up. Yeah, I know. I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories. I mean, and stories of the forest are like the best stories ever. Just can't beat them. Unbeatable. So now this is called the soil texture triangle, right? But because you just heard that story and most of you were able to do the assignment, they will be able to like really, really understand this bit of complicated triangle. Like some of you might already understand. But if you see over here, we talked about the three things, clay, silt, and sand, and they're always present at different ratio. So if your soil has complete sand, it's just complete, there's no silt and there's no clay, kind of thing that happens on a beach, because the major weathering process over there was salt water, the sea water that comes in waves. So it's not very intense weathering, but a calculated way of weathering. There you'll see 100% sand in a lot of areas. And if not 100%, then, there'll be like smaller components, like, let's say this is your clay, so this is like 0% clay. And then the clay level is rising till it gets to 100%. This is your sand, niche wala. It's like zero sand, no sand at all. And it's rising like this till it's 100%. And this is your level of silt. There is no silt over here. And then it rises and increases in this direction, right? So a place which is completely sand or has major, like at least like 90% of sand, right? So they'll form sandy soil. Places where, the clay soil dominates. And it's very interesting that, the moment the percentage of clay becomes more than 55, it's such a dominating factor that it starts inheriting clay properties, which gets mitigated. You can see as the level of sand rises. So over here, your clay percentage is 40, which you can see over here. It's okay. These are things you get familiar with as you keep working. So don't get stressed if you don't understand it. We'll be doing certain exercises that will help you understand them even better. Right? So at this level, it's 40% sand, 40% clay. But as the level of sand increases, it starts nullifying the effect of clay. So while this is still 40%, now it's sandy clay. It has a little more balanced property of its own, right? And thus that thing happens, certain places, there's like, like once if you have 0% sand, for example, in places where there's like zero, which is over here, this is the line of 0%. So this is a 0% sand line, correct? So here, if there's no sand over there, but just by the presence of silt, you can see that after 40% of silt, this is like 60 clay. You can see from here 60 clay and 40 silt, right? This is a silt line. So beyond this, it starts exerting a lot of effect on the soil where it becomes a bit silty clay, then becomes silty clay loam. They're all different kind of soils and their properties, and we'll talk about it later, but how then. So like, right, so it can be a clay loam can also have 40% clay, but it can also exist in 30% clay, based upon how much silt is there and how much sand is there, right? So, okay, a little complicated. Now we'll step back and I'll ask you a few quick questions, and you take your time and you still answer it even when other people have answered it, and that's okay. You take your time to understand it. We all have different paces of working over here, and I would love to see you guys, try, and that will be really great. I'll give you a ratio of sand, clay, and silt. And you have to tell me, looking into this diagram, in which type of soil will it form. Okay, ready to go? And I'll type it here in this window. Sand 40%, clay 20%, and silt 40%. What kind of you went into some direct chat? Just give me a moment. Everyone in meeting. Yes. What kind of soil you think this will form? Loam. Okay. More answers. Come on, try to trace it. You can see it. Okay, we have clay loam, silty clay loam, loam. Yes, I love the diversity of the answers. Yeah. Good. Full marks for trying, all of you. Anna. If the more coming, yeah, let clay loam, clay loam. We have silt loam. Okay. Okay, then let's go back to our thing. Sand 40. So this is the sand thing. So this is sand 40, clay 20. This is the clay chart, and clay 20, and silt 40. This is the silt chart and silt 40. Okay, now let's try tracing it down. This is the silt line for 40%. This is your sand line for 40%. You can see these arrows over here, which will tell you which direction they're going. And you can see the clay line for 20%. And they all meet at loam. Interesting. Got it? Are you in for another one? Think into it this time? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to put it out. This time we'll work with 40% clay, 50% sand, and 10% silt. Go ahead. Sandy clay, sandy clay, sandy clay, sandy clay. Good, good, good. You guys picked it up. Thank you. Feel accomplished. 40% clay. So this is our clay line, which is pointing in this direction. So 40% clay and 50% sand. This is a sand line. And this is 50% over there. That's how it goes. And then obviously silt is 10%, and that's where it comes. Yeah. So yeah, it's sandy clay. Nice, brilliant. Yeah, I think you were like the fastest batch to get it. So round of applause. Normally it takes a little longer to get this thing worked out. So yeah, I like working with smart kids. Yes. So now you see that, it could be sandy clay, even if it's 40% clay or if there's a higher percentage of clay. So these are the, whatever the resultant kind of soil is formed is actually based upon the ratio of all the three presents. And what will happen if I take a clay soil over here? Okay. So this is how much? This is 50% clay and this is 20% silt and it has 30% sand. And what will happen if I keep adding more and more and more sand? I keep going to a beach, take some sand, put it there. Keep going to a beach, take some more sand and start mixing it into the soil. What will happen then? Probably sandy clay, it will start moving in this direction where, you're because you're increasing the thing, this you keep increasing, it becomes sandy clay at one point, and you still keep topping more and more and more sand, and then it becomes sandy clay loam. And then they should decide, oh, it's just too much sand, it needs some silt also. So you start adding some more silt, and then it starts moving in this direction. You like more silt, 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 and then probably it will reach loam. So that's how texture of the soil can actually alter based upon the kind of component you're putting into it. You can put more sand and make it a little more sandier, sandy clay loam. You can put some more silt and you can make it here. From here, if you keep putting that silt and you just don't stop, so it will start moving again towards that thing, it will become silt loam. And you keep adding it all the way through, it will one day become completely silt. Right? So do you see how soil change, So while a soil in any given area will have a certain inherent properties, uh, it changes with if you add certain things, and that's why a lot of farmers, they'll take silt and they'll add it to the soil, because of a very interesting reason. Yeah, because of all these kind of soil, can you tell me which one would be like a favorite soil for the farmer? We studied in geography when we were kids. I remember that from the school. Silt. So you think that this will probably, which, yeah, you think that this is what the farmers are gaining for? I have silt loam, I have loam. Yes, you know, loam is the most balanced soil of all sorts, and different variation of loam for different kind of crops. But if it's pure silt, again, that it won't be able to provide a lot of support. I mean, it's not really great quality. You can't just grow things on pure silt. There's certain things that grow, but a more balanced soil is always sort of the best out there. Yeah. So if so people choose to put silt because especially in places if this soil is somewhere in this dimension, and they want to move towards loamy, so adding silt provides that effect where it has chance of getting into loam, you know. But if your same thing, if your soil is somewhere over in this bracket, this is your soil is, and you keep adding more silt, it actually is counterproductive because it's moving further away from the balanced soil. So if you're on this side, what kind of adding elements would help you move to a more balanced soil? Sand. That's what you'll do then from here. You'll move towards sand. Because if you put clay, then you'll move upper, which is again not that great. But if you move here, you'll put more sand. Yeah. So that's how it is, Good. So come on, put your assignment result. What kind of soil did you find when you did the test? And if you remember, the length of the ribbon that was formed. We have a loamy sand, no ribbons were formed, but the ball was formed. Yeah. So it would be somewhere over here, the loamy sand. A very rough ball. Yeah, it just keeps breaking, but it will stay while it can. Others, what did you get? Sandy clay, ball and ribbon formed, but few cracks. Yeah. Sandy clay, 6 centimeter. Yeah, I can imagine it can go all in all. And you remember, like when you talk about it, like how long that ribbon can get, and ask the people who were struggling to just get the balls formed. That's the sandy people. Yeah. Sandy loam, is that no good for first? Oh no, there's no soil that's no good. It's just that we're all born different. And all soils are born different based upon what kind of place and what kind of origins they come from. What kind of life experiences that they have gone through, what made them break down in the first place. So yeah, so soils doesn't pick, you'll still find dense forest growing everywhere. Right? Then there's silty clay. Yeah, silty clay is somewhere over here. Yes. Loamy silt. So you see the amount of diversity. Loamy silt, loamy silt, loamy silt, silty loam, loamy silt. Oh, there's no loamy silt, is it? No, there's silt loam. Then there's silty clay. Yes, there is silty clay over here. Silty clay loam is there. There's silt loam, right? So it's very interesting. Like it can be either sandy clay or it could be, silty clay and all those kind of things. So all the soils are born different, and you really, really, really can't pick, like you can't change it. So if I go and write and say that, okay, fine, you have whatever you have sandy soil, you start getting a lot of silt and other things, because we all want to get towards loamy, but life doesn't work like that, right? Life is different and life is very special. And that's where the magic of the forest come in. Okay, are we good to move ahead? Are there questions in the soil texture triangle? You think you got it? You have questions? Want to ask me something? No questions? Yeah, it's all good. Good. So alluvial is not based upon the texture, but it's just a way of origin. So alluvial soils are usually found along the rivers. So it's just, so alluvial soil, or when we say laterite soil, or when we say red soil. So these are much more, there are different categorization. So alluvial soil you'll find alluvial soil to be a little more towards like silt loam, silty clay. So they are not based upon the texture, that definition. So when you talk about just the texture of the soil, so independent of origin, this is how you assess the soils. But you can get into the red soil and black soil and other kind of things. Black soils are very clay. So in the black soil area, you'll find clay, you'll find silty clay, you'll find clay loam, you'll find sandy clay. These are the kind of soils you'll find in the black soil areas. Yeah. So that's just different way of categorizing. So this is purely on texture. You only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You only have 12 types of soil. Yeah. Still not sure how to identify percentages in type? Oh, it's okay. So you guys did the ribbon test and I wanted you to do that just to get the hang of it. If you want very accurate, but you don't need that level of accuracy also. तो मोटा मोटा पता चल गया कि यार ये है, that's it. That's you need to work it. But if you love numbers, you love statistics, you love playing with things, then there's a thing called jar test. That sitting at home can give you much more accurate percentages of each soil type. I mean, it doesn't really affect the results that much, but I'll share with you today on the group how to do the jar test, and some of you can actually try doing it. It's not that difficult. Does adding manure change the soil type? You think so? What do you guys think? Okay. Just adds nutrients. No. Okay. Won't change the texture. Okay. No. Okay. If you remember, it's actually the particle size. They're all different particles, but they're all physical particles, all the soil components. And nutrients are also physical things. So if you have a room full of, brats, tugs, and some of them, mises, the clay, and some of them silt, and you put in, let's say, corporate businessman in together, and then you start putting in IT professionals, and these are like different things, like nutrient, like compost, or other kind of minerals and materials, then the texture will start changing because things in the world has changed, something has changed, and we'll see how things have changed. So when we'll go back to succession, because all the mystery lies in succession. You understand succession, you understand one of the most fundamental core philosophies of forest, because it influences everything out there. It influences what you plant, how you plant, the process you go about it. So remember we talked about, the kind of erosion, how that kind of erosion has happened. If this has happened due to air, it will more likely convert into sand, dry air. So that's why you'll feel a lot of sand in the desert. It's just that rough, hot, dry air just weathering down the rocks slowly by slowly. If it has gone through chemical alteration, it will form a lot of clay things over there. So what kind of soil is being formed is very independent. It's just dependent upon what kind of environment was there, right? And it's unique to every single place. And these plants over here, they'll adapt to it like theek hai, So initially, what you have is probably, let's say that you only have a loamy sand, and happens because of certain areas. And now you have certain plants which are like very okay with loamy sand, right? It's far away, so it's not it doesn't have amazing water retention properties. It doesn't retain much water. So these are the two things which the texture affects. One is the water retention property of a soil. Your clay has very low retention, your sand has low retention, your loam has the highest retention of water because it is such a mixed soil. It can retain a lot of water inside it. Your sandy clay will have a little lower, so they all have a range of like how much water they can retain, every single soil type. Right? Silt loam will have a very different water retention property, like little less, but more than the others. And then the second thing is the air perforation, how much air can circulate through it. In which case, sandy soils have the highest air perforation. And you need that air because even the soil has to breathe. So the microbes have to breathe. So if there's no air going into the soil, the microbes will die. They'll just be choked out. There'll be no air left to breathe. Your roots need to breathe. The roots that work with modules, they need to breathe. So compact. No. So that's why your sands have very high. So this area has very high air perforation in general, and it starts reducing. So actually, sand has better air perforation than loam also, but it starts reducing as you move away from this region. So these are the two things affects the texture, the water retention and the air, right? So in much earlier on, for example, if we have a very loamy sand, it will have very less water retention, so there's hardly any water for the plants to derive from. So probably the perennial herbs are so you start with small annual plants. Annual plants are the ones which just come up in the monsoon season, and then they'll like survive for a while, and then once the monsoon is gone, they'll die out. Then they'll come back, just the very pretty flowers they usually have. Lovely they are. So these are the annuals. Annuals are the ones that just come for a certain time and then they're gone. Compared to perennial is something which is there to stay, be there forever. But then because these annual plants have very small structure, they're very small in sizes, and they're not much complicated, because to build larger and larger structure, you need much more minerals. You need a lot of micronutrients, because minerals are the building block. In a place where there are no minerals available or it's not readily available, your plants can grow at the max like couple of feet, like 2 feet or 1 feet, without the minerals, because beyond that they won't be stable. These structures will keep falling down. But to have very strong structure, you need a lot of minerals. But these kind of soils are very thin right now. There's not much mineral available, and even water is very seasonal. So it's your annual plants which will come when the water is there. And because it's a sandy loam, for example, the water will dry out very quickly, and these plants will die off. But every time they die off, they've already formed some roots over here, bit of roots. And these roots die off in the same place. And every time again they'll break up this bedrock a little more with their roots, and they'll die off. And this will happen over years and years and years, till the time there's enough rooty material, organic material that's there. And every time a root goes in, it leaves a kind of a tube. So every time it decomposes, it leaves some organic material there, and it leaves bit of tubes, through which the air can start moving in and out. And that's how the soil finally starts to breathe. And once it's able to breathe more, it will be able to retain more water inside it, into these capillaries, and more air is able to flow inside, which will allow for a little more higher forms of perennial plants to start growing over there. Right. And then again, these will keep growing over here. Some of them, their roots will start growing there. They'll start opening up the soil further. They'll start breaking the rocks further. And a lot of their roots, when they die, will again be assimilated into it. Right. And as this entire process is happening, slowly what is happening is that, because of these, these tubes, these channels being formed, its air perforation capacity, its ability to uh, move the air starts increasing. And now, because it was initially all sandy, every time these roots are dying, and there's a lot of organic material, which is being left behind. So they have much better potential or capacity to hold water compared to just the sand. So what happens is that, that organic material, which is increasing its water retention capacity, starts moving the soil into this side. It's not the soil texture that's changing, but what is now happening is okay, tell me what is happening. Let me type it out. Your final texture is your physical texture plus your biological texture. So while the kind of soil, that was formed, is completely, physical texture is completely based upon the origin. It's that new addition of biological properties that's actually changing the way the soil behaves. Right. And what will happen is that, if you take if you take it back into this kind of things, and you can know now because there's a lot of organic material over here, if you take out the soil and you wash it and you clean it and you sieve it, properly, just clean and remove all the organic material out of it. You wash it so all the organic material gets dissolved in water and flows away, while only the texture is left. You'll find that this has been reverted. So even if you take loamy soil, even if like slowly, because of organic matter, the soil moved in this direction. If you wash it and clean it and let it out to dry, you'll see it has again acquired just a loamy sand property because its biological texture is gone. Right. So thus slowly, as more and more then insects start going inside and dying inside and creating those spaces, earthworms keep going inside and out and inside and out and inside and out, more and more of this perforation. So the job which was initially just done by sandy particles of letting the air flow is now also being done by earthworms who are going inside and letting the air flows, or by roots which are opening up the soil and making space for it. The job which was initially done by silt of holding on to the water is now also being done by the carbonic elements which are there, the dead roots and all. They're also absorbing the water just like silt. And thus, these elements, they start moving things towards loam. Slowly, the soil's water retention properties, they increase. The air perforation properties, they increase. There's more air flowing through it. And this, this soil, even though technically the physical texture for this is loamy sand, it has now started behaving like a loamy soil because all the biological elements that have added to it. And the day you take this biological, you wash this, you take a forest soil from the deepest and most established forest, you do a texture test, you do a ribbon test for it, and you'll find it's much more closer to loam. You go to a forest and you find a good patch which has a lot of humus, which has like a lot of shade, there are a lot of dense and old trees around it. You take it up and you do your ribbon tents and you'll find that it is much more loamier, and if not loam, then somewhere around it. And you take the same soil, you put it in water for a while, let all the organic matter dissolve, and then just let it go and dry it out, and then do the texture test, and you'll find the original texture coming in, which would have been there. So forest by its own self, as part of the succession, while the forest goes through succession, is the soil also that goes through succession evolution. And as the soil's capacity to hold water and air and life increases, more and more complex life forms of the climate species are able to survive. So pioneer species can survive in degraded soils also, but climate species cannot. You need a mature soil for climate species to even survive. And that's why a lot of climate species are not able to survive the plantation, because people just like, theek hai, laga do yahan pe. But around it, it's all, the soil hasn't really gone through that process. So when we work with Miyawaki method, we actually work on bringing the soil closer to this thing. No matter where we are. And that's what even when you do the farming, no matter what you do, you try to bring things in, right? So, yeah. Questions or comments? I mean, anything else? These are like heavy topics. I mean, and it's a lot to be digested in such short period of time, but I think we'll get there. Yeah, so the soil itself is making the forest itself is making the soil balance. There's a self-correction that's happening over there. It's like physical, because when there's no life, it's just the physical texture that affects things. But once there's life in the soil, then even the bacterias, the presence of bacterias, that will influence the way the soil behaves. Yeah. Good. Thank you so much for all your patience. And those who didn't do the soil test, please go ahead and do it. you have 2 days off, which are not like chutti. I mean, there are things to do. That behavior change over the years? Yes. Behavior it takes hundreds of years. You know, it's big thing, hundreds of years. But if there is a degradation that has happened, for example, there's a forest fire that has happened, or, all of a sudden a JCB comes, those earth excavating machines, and they start, opening up the soil, cut, and, cutting down all the trees, or even tilling the soil, which exposes them to the sun, and all the water starts evaporating, the life form starts going away. Then, slowly, the soil will again move back in its succession. Yeah. But one thing is that, because there's already the soil depth is there, there's only a limit till which it will go back. And then from there, it will start coming back. क्योंकि कुछ ना कुछ तो मिट्टी है. इसलिए secondary succession happens much more faster. So is SGNP a forest? Does it have a climax trees? Do you think so? So SGNP is the Sanjay Gandhi National Park. It's in Mumbai. It has climax trees, yes, but it doesn't have it in that level of abundance in which they should have been there. So if you actually visit SGNP, you'll see a lot of, for example, Semel, silk cotton tree, which is a pioneer. You'll see a lot. But there are climax species also, but they're not living there as a strand. The moment you go into a ravine where the water flows, you will see, like for example, there are places where you'll see jamun as a climax for the riverine. Actually, jamun is not even a climax for the riverine. It's intersuccessional. But we'll form them, make like large colonies, just jamun everywhere for long distances. So that's how your climax communities are formed, where there's like a few of the species who are specializing in living as families. So if you find very dense parts of SGNP, yes, it will have climax forest. But otherwise, we'll see that because the soil is so exposed, you always see that there's like a lot of like sandy and rocky kind of soil everywhere, but you won't see much life in it. Yeah. So yes, it does have climax trees, but doesn't have climax communities in the level, because SGNP has seen a lot of degradation, especially because of the human intervention. There's like a lot of tree cutting that has happened, other kind of things. So is tilling good for soil? So it actually, every time you till the soil, this stability is lost because all your um, capillaries are broken that the earthworms have made, the natural capillaries. So, and your compaction steps in. And we'll talk about it tomorrow, what compaction is. And those are the things which really make the soil then less. And then you have to keep adding more things, and you have to keep tilling it every year, because that's the only way the soil will open up to breathe, because otherwise everything else is gone. Yeah. What does lack of mushrooms on the forest floor shows? Exactly, lack of mushrooms on the forest floor show that somehow the forest is not in the soil is not in its climax stage. Because if it was, there would be a lot of mushrooms. Because it's a very important component. That means there's lack of fungi over there. It is degradation of some sort. Will it change texture of the soil? Yes, it changes. So the physical texture will always be the same. But the total texture, which is actually some of the physical and biological, that will change. Like the way soil behaves will change. But no matter what happens, even after thousands of years, unless some chemical changes have happened, which have, further broken down the sandy, which usually doesn't happen, doesn't break down further. Yeah, the kind of soil, the kind of physical texture of the original soil will be based upon how it was formed in the first place. And that doesn't change. Yeah. Good. Nice. More questions? Very good. If you keep finding it, you can keep popping it up over the WhatsApp group that we have, and we'll keep answering them. there itself. So not a bit much of an issue. What I'll do with you, I'll share with you two annexures, which are like, like study companion to, thank you, Anuja. Yes, I love teaching. Hmm. Yeah, in college, I would always be debarred in exams. So most of the times I would not be allowed to sit for the exams. But then, all my friends, I'll just sit and teach them like, अच्छा अच्छा अच्छा, ये पढ़ लो, ये पढ़ लो, ये हो जाएगा, and then I'll see them goodbye as they go for the exams, and I'll just chill in my room because I chill in my room all the semester and didn't go to the classes. Yeah, I wasn't a very good student. Probably I didn't have good teacher, but that's fine. So I'll send you, documentaries to watch. There's a very interesting documentary on Dr. Kira Miyawaki. It's called The Green Tide. And brilliant. Watch it. You'll get a bit of sense of it. I'll send you a few of the concepts on ecological succession, which you can study further, read further, and build a little more understanding of it. So these are the materials that you have to go through, right? And for those who haven't completed the first, the soil texture wala, please do that. Now today you understood like what's the important of the ribbon test is, and go ahead and whenever you get it done, just post it on the WhatsApp group. Those who missed out on the first workshop session, please go ahead and watch it in this time. The YouTube thing has been posted. I'll also post the link to the channel, which will have all the different sessions. I'll send the link to the documents. Everything will be sent on the WhatsApp. If any of you in particular, do not use WhatsApp or are not part of the group, just send me a mail and I'll happily share with you resources over the mail. That's not an issue. And yeah, I mean, read well, do well, because that will help you strengthen your understanding. Because you can just imagine, we just done 2 days of the workshop. It's a 6-day workshop, and, topics are getting a little more sophisticated and common. We have actually now ventured quite deep into the forest territory, So if you read these things and watch these things, it will actually help you sort out all the amount of information. It's like now finally digesting it slowly. And then it will prepare you for the third day. Right, the 4th day is the hardest, I feel. It can like really give you headache, but we'll try to like simplify it as much as we can. But if you can hold on to the process till then that'll be great. Yeah, there's always much to learn about soil. I mean, such an interesting living medium. Brilliant. Yeah, and all the things I've learned is thanks to the amazing teachers that I've had before. Yeah, so thank you so much. Which forest types and examples did you give for Pondicherry and Sri Lanka? Oh, that's a TDEF, tropical dry evergreen forest, tropical dry evergreen forest. And they're dying, they're like almost gone. And every time like somebody plants non-TDF species, in Chennai, like it gives me a heart attack. Like you plant a neem in Chennai, like please don't do it. You have like amazing like Hexant, I don't even remember. But Ceylon wood and a lot of other species are very prominent over there. Yeah. And similarly for people around Mumbai, it's for you, it's a very different things. But we'll get into those details about, what are these ecoregions, what does it actually mean tropical dry evergreen forest? We'll break it up on the species sessions. Yeah. Oh, they're all real forests. They're all at different stages of succession in different places. Some certain places you'll find climax forest. Certain places you'll find them to be in a secondary succession stage. I mean, they haven't gone back to being climax because they were lopped down or because some landslide happened or some forest fire happened. But all the forests are real. Even like SGNP, they're real forests, yes. But they are little at a different stage of succession. It's not that pioneer, this stage is bad stage or not good enough stage. But it's just that what is happening in this world right now is there's just too much of intermediate stage and too little of climax stage. And that's the problem. Otherwise in the forest also, there will be part of the forest which are completely forming climax communities, and there are parts which are forming pioneer communities. And even the climax communities will change, For example, cacti can be a climax community in a very desert area, while it can be, while it will become a pioneer species in further inland, towards central India. What are the reason for the forest fires in Uttarakhand? Mostly pine. I mean, we took out the climax community, which was the oak and rhododendron system, and we planted pioneers, everywhere, like non-stop. We just planted pioneers and monoculture of pioneers. And it's a very interesting thing, like how the war between the pine and the oak happens, where pine uses things under its arsenal. But that's a story for another time. I'll probably share with you guys one of these days to come. Yeah, but pine should not have been there at this stage in such large numbers. And that's the root of the fires. And we are the ones who cleared the original forest and just planted pine everywhere. Pine was part of our forest also, at places and different ways, but not in this amount. It was always balanced by the ecology, by the other communities. But now, human intervention is amazing. But while human intervention is amazing, we actually destroyed so much of the forest. Human intervention can actually bring them back. And that's the reason why we are having this workshop. Yeah. Voice is, yeah, voice of fun. I mean, it's us. Yeah. So one assignment I would like to give you, one more, and I'll post it in the group, is, you try to find how ecological succession happens in a human life, So you take up a scenario, which is not plants, but any other community. It can be a community of people. It can be certain else, and like make a nice little description, like small paragraph of, a succession that you see, it could be, and be very creative with it, because succession is everywhere. Ecological succession is just the forest succession, but there's succession happening everywhere in every sphere of life. Come up with something creativity where you find that thing, bit of a case, and just share it in the group. Yeah. Is it a clear assignment? I'll post it a little more detail. Yeah. Don't worry. And keep doing your journals, huh? And if any of you feel like, please feel free to, share your journal in the group once in a while, or share it with me. It's also all right. Yeah, because it's very important. Observation is a very key skill, which forms the root of any forest creation work. And this mandala exercise that I've given you, you keep doing it. It will sharpen your observation skill, and you'll be able to see things that you had never seen before. And it's a very essential skill for a forest creator. So like, while it might sound little bland and useless, and doing the same thing every day, just the same patch, because you have to look at the same patch every single day. But 1 meter by 1 meter, yes, that little box you make somewhere, you mark it, and I'll send you a few examples of mandal exercise that people have done before, so you'll have a little more idea about it. In that 1 meter, it's almost like doing vipassana with the soil. When you really put down your focus. Yeah. But time's up, long back up. I think we've overdone it by 10 minutes. I usually try not to overdo things, because then people get too tired and then they don't show up for the next workshop class. So I hope many of you will show up, and I hope all of you had fun. And we'll see you on Thursday. Yeah? Tomorrow and the afternoon classes. Thursday there's a class. But these are the days you do the assignments and do the things. Yeah. Perfect. Goodbye, folks. Thank you. Thank you for being there. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Rajesh, you can catch up on the workshop of the first session if you missed out on that one. Next class is Thursday. Yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye-bye. Let's stop the recording at least.
Bye.
Bye, Bombay. Hello. Tough job doing workshops. कितना बोलना पड़ता है.
Munna, there's no food only for night. I have to eat
Hey, what happened?
only.
Bye, Mannuda.
Bye.
Bye. Hi, Mad.
Oh, Madam, Adil is there. Who is there? Wait, let me just stop the recording.